So far, you've learned how to use a batch system to execute a large number of independent jobs. But sometimes your workload is more complicated than that. Maybe you have jobs that depend on each other, or maybe you have a workload that's so big you can't give it to the batch system all at once. In this case, what you need is a workflow system to help you to express the overall structure of what you're trying to accomplish. So what is a workflow system? A workflow is a structured description of a large number of batch jobs and files that have internal dependencies that explain which job comes before which, and which files are produced by which job. This is sometimes known abstractly as a directed acyclic graph, or a DAG. That's a common way of structuring a workflow. Now, a workflow management system is a piece of software that takes a workflow description and executes it by dispatching each piece of the workflow to a batch system piecemeal. Here's a graphical example of a workflow. As you can see, it's a graph of both files and jobs. In this case, we use the blue squares to represent files and the green circles to represent jobs. And this is actually a visualization of a real workflow known as a SNP Explorer that comes from some of our collaborators in bioinformatics. And I think this is a good example of a workflow because it shows that often that the structure is irregular. It's not simply that you want to run a whole bunch of independent jobs, but rather some jobs come before others, and they may produce complex outputs that need to be reduced later. So here you can see the main execution phase in the middle produces a large number of outputs that then need to be collected together through final stages. And at the end of the workflow, we have one batch job left to run in order to collect all the output together. It's useful to think of workflows as a very high-level programming language. When you're going to do a large amount of computational work, you start from the very bottom by designing functions and classes, each of which one does a very simple, compact thing. And then you write a program that arranges those functions and classes into a coherent whole. Well, a batch job is a little bit bigger than a program because it describes a program, but also its files and its requirements and all the other things necessary to run it in a batch system. And then going up one more level, a workflow is a language that describes a large number of batch jobs, each with their own complex details and dependencies between them. So I'll give you a quick but real example from some of our collaborators at the LifeMapper project. LifeMapper is a bioinformatics research project, and one of the tasks that they do is called species distribution modeling. And their species distribution modeling is studying the interaction of climate change and the simulation of how animals and plants migrate as the climate changes. So to perform this study, they have to run a bunch of simulations that integrate both climate data as well as animal and plant behavior. And they have to run a very large number of combinations. For 12,500 species and 15 different climate scenarios and 6 different experiments, we need to run a sequence of jobs to carry out that particular simulation. And then each one of those simulations, which is called a projection, is going to produce about 500 megabytes of data. Now, this structure here is a simplification of just, I believe, 10 species. We have to do that for 12,500 species. And this is going to result in 1.1 million batch jobs with over 72 terabytes of output. Now, we can't just take that and throw it all at a batch system and expect it to work. And there are several reasons, but the most important one is few batch systems are really prepared to accept 1.1 million jobs sitting in their queue. It'd make it very slow and efficient. The other is it may not be possible to materialize all 72 terabytes of output simultaneously, and so we need to do it in an organized way. So to execute this workflow, we need to write it in a workflow description language, and then we need to give it to a system called a workflow management system. That workflow management system is going to read the DAG structure of the workflow and decide which jobs need to run first. In this particular graph, it'd be the jobs at the very top because they're ready to go and they don't depend on anything else. So those jobs would get submitted to the batch system. You may have to create some submit files or other details along the way. And then the distributed batch system is going to go and dispatch those on a cluster and let them run. Now that might take a while. It might take hours or days, who knows, but when they're done, the distributed batch system will remove them, inform the workflow management system, and then it will go back and run some other jobs that get sent to the distributed batch system. And this continues on until the workflow is complete. The workflow management system is doing more than just the dependency management. It also has to be careful to give the batch system no more jobs than it can actually handle. And it may also sequence the jobs so as to minimize the storage consumption or otherwise get the execution completed faster. So that's the basic idea of a workflow management system. And as we go forward, we'll look at the details of some specific workflow management systems.